So, as a student in the EDD program at Spalding University, I have an upcoming assignment to create a case study. And the case study comes behind looking at the research and the literature on the subject of global and leadership, global and local leadership. So, in the class, we've had an opportunity to read primarily three books: um, Global and Diverse Leadership, Jean Shaolin et al., 2018, The Chessboard and the Web, Anne-Marie Slaughter, 2017, and New Power, Hymans and Timms, 2017. And so I'm giving thought to the plan for the case study. And I've been on a research binge as I explore this idea. And so I want to give a little bit of a summary of my thoughts here, just so I can begin to plan the case study. So first, Jean Lao Chen really introduces new thoughts from my standpoint around Western versus non-Western leadership styles, and things like trait theory, which is a predominantly Western style where the theory is based on kind of hierarchical, top-down leadership, a style that's very resolute, uh, based on characteristics such as so-called intelligence, such as appearance. We know that the predominance of leadership in America, which is the West, is white male leaders. So if you see, the characteristics of white male leadership, um, appearing to be stern, resolute, appearing to project an image, um, and we see it often in politicians, the dark suits and tie, red, blue tie, um, just uh, that appearance, and of course the um, style of leadership that's kind of top down, um, seeking to be a more authoritarian, seeking to be what's the best way to say it? Seeking to be um, win at all costs, seeking to declare the best thoughts, the best ideas, the best approaches to society, and declaring that our way is the best way, no other way is better than ours. And so we get into that kind of me, I type of leadership style in terms of what I believe, what affects me, what's important to me. And we hear about, this theory of individualism versus collectivism. And I'm reminded by the EDD 901 course. I read the book Morality by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And Rabbi Sachs, in his book Morality, talked about I versus me, um, me, I, no, not I versus me, but the me, I versus us, we concept. And that, looking out for my own interest versus the collective interest of the greater good of others. And you remind you of the golden rule: do unto others, not as they do unto me, but do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. Really, is about doing unto others what is good for others because you want what's good for others to be good for you. And so I think that's a big part of that mindset of Western leadership versus the non-Western style being more about the greater good, collectivism, the collective approach, seemingly to be based on moral principles versus, win at all cost mindset. And so I certainly will want to touch on that. But the other part of my research, when I looked at the chessboard and the web, it began me to thinking about the fact that the chessboard nation-based, nation-centered approaches versus um, network-centered approaches is really the way of the world, the network approach, because even in America, we are one nation, but there are many facets and many alliances, and of course you have partisan politics, of course, within that framework. And so there's different things that people rally around. And that becomes kind of the essence of networking is common interest, affinity groups, being able to go after issues from an issue standpoint versus what's best for a nation. So the network idea is an approach that I'm thinking about too, which really lines up with the third piece of literature, the new power concept, that talks squarely about new power concepts. Hymans and Thames talks about new power, and their focus mainly being on addressing the power of the web, the power of ultra high speed internet, global. And when we talk about global leadership, the web is really the great equalizer. That's one of the things I started learning about the web back in the '90s when it was beginning to trend, and we went into the year 2000 concerned about the web. We were talking about Y2K, for example, but we also talked about the internet. And I, as a professional, I remember, big part of my work as a engineer and as a technologist was to really help our community. And I've always worked in underserved communities. I'm a product of underserved communities, and I'm still a part of the underserved community culture and mindset. And because my leadership is really focused on addressing the underserved community needs. And so I remember this whole idea of closing the digital divide and making sure that the internet becomes the great equalizer. And I was looking at that time from a community standpoint, or at least from at best at a national perspective. But when you think about the World Wide Web being worldwide, it is a global platform. So Anne-Marie Slaughter's work, focusing on the web versus being nation-centered, really got me to start thinking about the power of the web from a leadership standpoint. And I must say, I'm a technologist. I'm already into technology, already a big fan of YouTube. I had begun to watch more YouTube than conventional television, following, from a sports standpoint, people like Stephen A. Smith, from a black leadership standpoint, Roland Martin. And in my recent research, I learned about Augustus Corbett, the Defiant Lawyers Network, and really grown a strong affinity. And by the way, as a leader, when I learn about leaders that are in spaces that align with my purpose and mission, I begin to, from a humanistic standpoint, want to get to know them. So I've actually, along the way, reached out to Roland Martin. Actually had a phone conversation with him, and I won't get into the details of that because there's some potential collaboration that I'm seeking with that. But I also reached out to Corbett, Augustus Corbett. And so that whole idea of researching the web and finding who is doing the work that aligns with my mission and purpose has, I think, becomes the focus of the case study, because One of the things I do as a leader, and it goes back to my mission, and I'm thinking about this case study from a standpoint of mission and purpose, not only individually but organizationally, because I am the president and CEO of Louisville Central Community Centers, a 75-year-old nonprofit organization located in Louisville's Russell neighborhood, which is one of the poorest census tracts in all of Jefferson County. Well, let me take that back. The poorest Census Tract 30 in Jefferson County is the poorest census tract in Jefferson County, Kentucky, one of the poorest census tracts in the states. In fact, one of the things we do as a community is to benchmark our work in Louisville against 15 other peer cities. There's a project we do called the Greater Louisville Project, where we take on key issues annually and we start benchmarking where we are on these issues, whether it's education, whether it's poverty, whether it's workforce issues. Most of the issues of the city, we frame it up and we start benchmarking and ranking ourselves in comparison to our peer cities. Won't get into the details of that, but one of the things in that, the poverty study of the Greater Louisville Project benchmarked poverty and found that Census Tract 30 was the poorest census tract, not only in Kentucky, well, not only in Jefferson County, I should say, but when you look at all the 15 peer cities that Louisville benchmarks itself against, it was the poorest. And so we're located in that, have been since 1948. And for most of our history, we have focused on addressing poverty. We were founded as a settlement house in 1948. If you understand the history of settlement houses, Louisville Central Community Center was one of those. The Jane Hull movement, Hull House, Chicago, founder of Hull House, Jane Addams, created this movement of settlement houses, which I often refer to as the go-to place for migrating families that were moving from rural America back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond into urban America. They needed a place to go to find out where the housing opportunities were, where the employment opportunities were, where the education opportunities were for children, and just to really get settled in and connected to the urban environments in pursuit of economic opportunity and prosperity beyond that. And so we were founded as a settlement house, and our mission primarily has always been focused on children, meeting the needs of children as families develop. And so hey, we have been around since the late 40s. And when I joined the organization, initially I joined as a child growing up in the same neighborhood, because I'm a product of Louisville's Russell neighborhood. And I grew up in the neighborhood, and I actually, as a child, frequented at the time Louisville Central Community Centers, my organization, was known as the Market Street Neighborhood House on 10th and Market. And I grew up in the Beecher Terrace neighborhood, which is less than a whole city block away from Market Street. And Beecher Terrace is actually the next street, Jefferson Street, going north in Louisville for Market Street. We were on 10th and Market, and I grew up, say, on 13th Street, between 12th and 13th Street, on Cedar Street, or Cedar Court in Beecher Terrace, and then later we moved to 13th Street. And so happens that my organization now is actually on 13th Street as well. I'm actually less than 150 feet away from the apartment that I grew up in Beecher Terrace, in Building 16 in Beecher Terrace, 463 South 13th Street to be exact. About 150 feet from where I preside at Louisville Central Community Center as the president and CEO, which is located at 1300 West Muhammad Ali, right on the corner of 13th and Ali. And where I grew up at 463 South 13th Street is actually very close to Muhammad Ali Boulevard and 13th Street. So having that life experience growing up in that area, I frequented the neighborhood house growing up, became a Boy Scout there, and other programs, arts and crafts, all types of youth programs. So that was the purpose of the settlement house. And then as I matriculated on, graduated, went to college, got a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and came back after college, worked at the airport, helped to do the airport expansion as an engineering technician in the early 1980s, early mid 1980s. Left there, became an engineer for the health department. Left there, became a director, first an assistant director and then a director at the Housing Authority of Louisville. And it was in that experience at the Housing Authority where I worked at from 1986 to the year 2000 for 14 years that I began to transition from the traditional bricks and mortar planning and development work that engineers are trained to do. Because actually, when I started working at the Housing Authority, I was in the maintenance operations side and became the assistant director of maintenance, and then we did a reorganization project where I became the director of work control, and I automated our maintenance workforce and became automated. And that was when I first got into technology and in personal computers, because I had gotten my engineering degree even before I got trained in personal computers. In fact, the advent of personal computers happened during that time frame in the mid 1980s. So I got trained in personal computing, but also, and this is what engineering technology trains you to do, it trains you to put uh, technical and engineering concepts. It's applied science. You learn how to apply the concept. So I immediately, as I learned, began to apply those applications and how to transform the way the housing authority did maintenance. And we did that. I won't get into the details. That's maybe another case study later. But what I want to get to is I began to really get into technology heavy at that time. So I transitioned from the maintenance side into the more of the administrative side. I was always on the senior management team at the housing authority, and I moved into the maintenance, not from the maintenance operations side, into a position called the director of special programs. And for the most part, director of special programs was the special assistant to the executive director. And as the executive director's office, the executive suite oversaw all the workings of the housing authority when it came to property management, maintenance, occupancy and leasing, facilities. We oversaw all of it. And there was a unique role that I played was to administer resident services. And so what landed me that promotion into that position was the fact that I had went back to school and got a master's degree in urban and regional planning and development at the University of Louisville. And so I began to transition again from bricks and mortar to people oriented solution planning, creating solutions that are people oriented. And I won't get into the weeds on that, but I just wanted to just give that foundation for, the work that I did when I left the Housing Authority was to go to work for the Urban League, was there for 11 years and really got heavy into the civil rights work, really dealing with issues, policy issues, but also program issues because we are a direct service provider at the Urban League, youth development, housing, and workforce development were the three flagships programmatically. And then we did a lot of advocacy work, a lot of community engagement work. There for 11 years, got recruited to come to Louisville Central Community Center. And I will go back that not only did I work was a part of Louisville Central Community Center as a child when it was a neighborhood house. Also, when I was at the Housing Authority, became a board member at LCCC. Got to know Sam Watkins, my predecessor, and befriended him and joined his board and learned so much and was inspired so much by his leadership, by his vision, because he was in social services as an agency. That's people would categorize LCCC as a social services or human services provider. But Sam was a businessman. He had a business mindset, and he believed in acting like a business and training people to think like a business. And so we began to talk about self-reliance, you know, get skills, get jobs, start businesses. And we did all those kinds of programs and still do those kinds of programs to this day. But the transition there, for me, when I first went to LCCC for many years, our mission was to advance self-reliance, which was a classic model of pick yourself up by the bootstraps, be self-sufficient, gain the skills and knowledge that you need to get a job, and do better for yourself as a family leader, do better for your children, require that your children also get education so that they can have a better life. And it was the whole classic self-reliance model. That was our mission statement, to advance self-reliance. When I transitioned from the number 2 position at LCCC, so when I was recruited to come there, Sam was in his succession planning mode, and I became the senior vice president for the last 5 years of his tenure. And he left in 2017. I became the CEO, and around that time, we were due an upgrade to our strategic plan. And again, the mission was, strategic plan classic. We need to revisit our mission, vision, values, and goals. And the mission was to advance self-reliance. Well, while I was in the senior vice president role, I began to work with the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities, which is a national umbrella organization, national network of some 500 human service organizations around the country. So speaking to Slaughter's concept of network, and being able to, and I had a lot of networking opportunities at the Urban League during my 11 years, being a part of the National Urban League, and being able to go to national conferences, regional conferences, benchmark my work against my peers across the country, learn from them, add value, and contribute. And so I think that's the power of networking from an alliance standpoint. But the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities became a tremendous eye-opening experience for me, because one of the things they were talking about, even in 2017, 2018, was this whole idea of advancing equity. And advancing equity began to resonate with me, because advancing equity, one of the things that Sam always talked about, is all about the economics. Prior to working closely with Sam for the years that I did, my theory for addressing poverty, the ideal solution set, was to get an education, to get trained, to gain knowledge, gain skills, and to become employable, and to raise your value so that someone would hire you. And that kind of reminded me of what my mother taught me growing up, because my mother was a great mom, great family leader, but never really talked to me as her oldest child about going to college. She talked to me more about, Kevin, you need to know what it takes to get a job and keep a job. That was her message for Mama. And so being able to understand that, that's what it was all about. Went to college, became employable, but didn't have problems getting jobs. Always was blessed to get good earning opportunities, good positions lined up with my education and training, and that kind of opened the door for me in a lot of cases. But I learned that no matter what that looked like from a success track standpoint, there was still, and this is what I learned through the Urban League, as well as through the alliances, there's still a lot of systemic issues, a lot of disparities, whether it be education, health, income, these gaps, these various gaps. The achievement gap was an eye opener for me when I was at the Housing Authority, when I found that 70% of the children going to public schools were below deficiency if they lived in public housing. 70%. An eye opener. I remember a board member saying, wow, it sounds like we're moving toward the dark ages if that's the reality. And yeah, that was the reality. And so education was always my thing. But Sam would say, no matter how much education you got to understand that in America, we live in a capitalist society, and it's about wealth. It's about being able to achieve wealth. So we got to deal with the barriers to achieving wealth in America. That's got to be our focus. One of the things we learned about in this whole model of helping people to get employed and being located in the poorest census tracts of our community, we learned that when people did exactly what our mission called for, achieve self-reliance, more often than not, they would simply move out of the neighborhood. And so our neighborhood was still a revolving door for poverty because, first of all, it was one of the reasons why it's the poor census tract is because we are heavily concentrated with low-income housing, low-income public assisted housing. When you think about Beecher Terrace, you think about Henry Green Apartments, you think about City View Park, formerly known as Village West. There's also the Hampton Place, which is partially subsidized. And of course, then there's this whole pervasive movement for Section 8 housing, all in these areas. So low-income public assisted housing is a policy, when it's heavily concentrated, that requires residents, in order to live there, they must be poor. And so if you're going to achieve self-reliance in that environment, you almost have no choice but to move out. So we realized too, and I knew this from a personal experience growing up in Beecher Terrace, that from a location standpoint, it is really a wonderful location. Why? Because it's literally a 7 to 8 minute walk into the downtown business district. Actually, depending on how close you are to 9th Street, it's less than that. Because 9th Street is the divided street, and you hear a lot about the 9th Street divide, but it's the border street between the central business district on the west side and the Russell neighborhood, which is the neighborhood we're talking about. And so being able to begin to have a different vision became the thing. We not only addressed that from a corporate standpoint at the LCCC, we began to convince our partners. So one of the first things I did upon becoming CEO at LCCC was to lead our board and our staff through a strategic planning process. And just the short version of that story is we transitioned our mission from advancing self-reliance, and we still hold on to that value of self-reliance because we believe we got to do for ourselves before anybody is going to do for us. In fact, we don't expect anybody else to do for us but us. And so self-reliance means you depend on yourself. But also, two other things. One, there are systemic disparities that no matter what we do for ourselves, we have not moved the needle on those disparities. So there's got to be something else we must advance. And so we moved from advancing self-reliance to advancing equity. And that became our focus even before it became in our minds, a national mantra, a national trend. Even before DEI became the thing, we were talking about advancing equity. Even before Juneteenth became a national holiday, at our organization, we were talking about advancing equity. And we got that through the trainings and the networking experience that we got from the Alliance for Strong Families and Communities. I must credit being a part of that network really helped us to ground ourselves when we went through strategic planning. In fact, we used partners from the Alliance to help us with our strategic planning process. And so we went to that mode, and that's still our mantra today. Our mission is to advance equity through the empowerment of children and families within the Russell neighborhood and surrounding West Louisville neighborhoods. And we have a vision statement, a vision of co-creating vibrant neighborhood conditions for children and families to thrive. And when we talk about thriving, we want them to thrive economically, academically, artistically. We want them to thrive culturally. We want vibrancy. We want empowerment to show itself in a very active and vibrant way. We have values, and we take the way that our value statement lines up with the studies of the program in leadership, the EDD and leadership program, is that we value leadership. And it's not leadership in the form of a title, it is leadership in the active sense. And how do we define leadership? Well, we created an acrostic, LEAD. LEAD. The L is lead with vision. Lead with vision. And that's one of the leadership styles, being a visionary leadership. And why is it important to have visionary leadership? Well, sometimes if your leadership is based purely on your capacities or the availability of resources that you have in your hand, then you're going to limit yourself with what you do strategically. But visionary leaders don't base the direction of their aspiration on what they have in hand, and it's based on the vision. And we believe that resources are to be developed. And so lead with vision is the L. The E is educate. When we do talk about educate in everything we do with our acrostic is in the active sense. So when we say lead, we put an ing on it. Leading with vision. When we talk about educate, it's educating on economic mobility. And that goes back to what I spoke about in terms, this is all about the economics. Follow the money. Let's get where the wealth accumulation strategy is there. Educate on economic mobility. For many years, not only that my organization, but the entire poverty serving community in our city talked about helping families to achieve economic stability. And that was because of the Metro United Way, which funded many nonprofits in our market, had an issue strand about economically stable families. Well, we understand that economic stability just means, stability, just holding on to what you got, status quo. But if you're already poor, you can be economically stable and there's no aspiration to change that. So economic mobility means we got to be actively moving toward a higher plane when it comes to economic. And the goal is toward wealth. That is the American dream, to have the ability to achieve wealth. So educate on how to do that. We do that a lot with entrepreneurship training alongside employment. But we put more into our entrepreneurship programs today than we did a few years ago, and more so than what we do just in our employability training programs. The A is advanced equity. Advanced equity. And that's where we get into advocacy, because advancing equity, and we say advanced equity, why? To avert, that's a question. Why do we say advanced equity? We say advanced equity for the purpose of averting or addressing or offsetting or closing disparities, closing these gaps, the racial wealth gap, the achievement gap, the health disparity gap. You know, um, in our community, the life expectancy for the 22 census tracts of West Louisville is about 16, 17 years lower than life expectancy on the other side of town. So we talk about advancing equity. Let's look for ways to avert that. So we got to challenge the status quo. And sometimes that comes with advocacy, addressing policy, addressing, we talk about health, for example, as well as economics, addressing root causes to these disparities. So that's the A, advance equity. The D, develop quality. We want to have a better quality of life for children and families in our community, especially in our predominantly African American underserved neighborhoods, a better quality of life. So that's our value statement, leadership. It takes leadership to challenge the status quo. It takes leadership to be dogmatic about the pursuit of these injustices and these inequities. It takes leadership to cast vision. It takes leadership to instill the value for educating. Take leadership to develop. So that is the value statement. So, giving you that background just so you have an idea of where we are now. Now, coming back to the case study, one of the things that the Webb research has done, coming off of Anne-Marie Slaughter's chessboard in the Webb and Timms and Hyman's New Power, is really looking at, when I talk about these whole leadership agenda, how do we address what's happening in our community? I've been at the forefront of DEI since DEI began to trend heavily in our community in the year 2020. And that happened as a direct response or reaction to the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor murders and the civil unrest that erupted in the midst of the global pandemic of COVID. And actually, 2020, we would reflect and recall that we had multiple pandemics. Certainly, the public health pandemic of COVID-19, which shut down the planet for a period of time, shut down our nation, shut down our community, caused us to all to have to change and reflect and rethink and recalibrate. We all remember that. But we also had the civil unrest pandemic. And we all know what happened after the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor killings and all that unrest that happened, not only in our city, but in cities across the nation. And then at the same time, we were dealing with a presidential election, and we had a political pandemic happening that culminated and still is alive and well today, but culminated with the January 6th, 2021 assault on the U.S. Capitol. And DEI, as it began to gain traction, be more receptive, I was called upon as a leader to speak to many groups about it because of my leadership and my work. And I spoke to the Jewish community, was invited to come and speak at the temple in Louisville, Kentucky, as a part of their Shabbat, one of their Shalom Shabbat experiences. Also was recruited to come and get active in the Rotary Club of Louisville. The Rotary Club had done some community engagement, some listening sessions, trying to figure out how do we, as a club, react to civil unrest in our community. One of those strategies became create a DEI committee. I was asked to consider chairing it. I accepted that, and I've been the first and inaugural, continue to this day, chair of that committee. And I got more active with the NAACP, became the Economic Development Committee chair of the NAACP, got more active with the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. And so just becoming more externally engaged around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues has been something that I've been focused on last 3-4 years. Now today, as I speak, as I write, DEI is being attacked as a policy at very high places in American society, including the U.S. Supreme Court, including the U.S. Congress, and no telling how many other circles that I'm not even aware of. But what's very visible is what has happened with the Supreme Court decision to eliminate affirmative action in post-secondary education, and also states are voting one by one on eliminating DEI policies in education first. We had the assault on critical race theory ahead of that, coming from a political side. And so I began to really get concerned because this becomes a direct assault on my being, my purpose, my career, my leadership, my organization, my community, my people. It's a direct attack. At least it has the perception of being a direct attack. It's very controversial, and it's hard to tell how it's actually going to end up. But the research in the web has led me to places where I'm paying a lot more attention. And Roland Martin's Unfiltered podcast series on his YouTube network, Unfiltered Podcast, Roland Martin Unfiltered, is trending in my circle because I'm a subscriber there. I watch videos daily, keeping up with his analysis of these issues. He's very much on it. And also, as I mentioned earlier, Augustus Corbett, his network, the Defiant Lawyers, is doing tremendous work of taking a very deep dive into these issues. Augustus Corbett, Dallas, Texas, is an attorney. He's also a minister, and he is an educator. And he gives podcast presentations where it's him and the data. And he presents it in a way that is empirical, is evidence-based. He will say often, I have the receipts on everything that I'm talking about. And he takes on everything from white nationalism to what's happening in the Supreme Court, certainly to what's happening in the presidential campaign. And it's brought my attention to the fact that there is a full frontal assault, politically speaking, on DEI. So the case study has got to be about framing up what the issues are around that work based on the work of Corbett, maybe some with Roland Martin, also some with the work that I've done. I've written articles about the anti-DEI legislation in Kentucky that have been published in our local black newspaper, the Louisville Defender. I attempted to write a policy position paper for the Rotary Club to adopt, but I learned in that process, even though I had the sentiment of the club behind me to say we understand, and this is a predominantly white club, white audience, we understand, but the club's constitution will not allow it as a club, us as a club, to take public positions when it comes to political issues. We can talk about the issues, but we don't take positions. Certainly we are a politically diverse, racially diverse group, and diversity is a core value. But and not only a core value within our club, but Rotary International has adopted a DEI policy. We do have a DEI policy, but my leadership was suggesting that we need to take a active public position in opposition of the impending legislation in Kentucky, which mirrors legislation that has been passed in the state of Florida, state of Tennessee, state of Utah, and I'm not sure how many others. And when those policies are enacted on these states, there is a massive shift away from DEI issues, including eliminating departments on college campuses that address that issue. And we don't know how devastating that is, but I understand that it's pretty devastating. I did have an opportunity to speak to a leader at the University of Louisville, African-American leader, very prominent leader, and asked what's at risk, and he said it can be devastating. I'm not sure how Spalding University feels about it, but I am seeking the opportunity to speak with Spalding about DEI. I don't know what Spalding's position is on DEI, but the case study, again, is building off of this research that is web-based, that is, there are within our nation alliances, and I'm not coming at this from a political standpoint. It's not about my brand of politics. I am an engineer, which trains me to be a problem solver, and have the skills and abilities to analyze and dissect and put solution sets in action. And I'm an applied science person. I'm not just a theoretical science person. So as a practitioner, I want to look at strategies that can be put into effect for addressing it. But my master's degree is in public administration with a focus on urban and regional planning and development. And as a public administrator, I'm trained to be apolitical. Apolitical. That means no matter who's in power, politically speaking, or who has political aspirations from a partisan standpoint, then my aspiration and skill and ability and leadership is to be able to engage them, no matter what their persuasion is, politically speaking. And then on top of that, as a leader of a nonprofit organization, by law, I am required to be nonpartisan, according to IRS. And so being apolitical, being nonpartisan has become a part of my professional DNA, and I take pride in that because, again, it's all about the issues. And as a human, I look at these types of measures and these types of policy concerns from a humanitarian standpoint. And so the case study has got to be really organized around how do we, in this new networked environment, move an agenda forward that addresses core values and core beliefs, and whether it's DEI or whether it's some of its predecessors, affirmative action, EEO or equal opportunity, or many of the various acts and titles from the Civil Rights Bill of 1964, or even the U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment of the Constitution, equal protection under the law for blacks. I realize we haven't always had equal protection under the law. We haven't always had equal opportunity. It's been legal in our country to treat black people differently. The Constitution speaks about being 3/5 of a human, still written to this day as such. The 13th Amendment even is potentially at risk. The amendment that freed the slaves. The reason why we celebrate Juneteenth is because we were freed in 1864. And so these are deeply core issues for who I am as a black man, as a leader, as a community leader who has been indigenous in the community that produced and raised him, as a leader to help this community do better. I feel good about the work that I've done, but I realize everything is at risk, and it's real. In my analysis of the work of Augustus Corbett, the evidence is there. My engagement with many other digital network champions like Roland Martin, who report daily, multiple times a day, the consistent political rancor that goes back and forth on these very issues of equal opportunity and sometimes just common sense. And, if I were to speak politics for a minute, you hear the partisan back and forth and often the characterization of Democrats as being radical. Well, there's enough radical stuff to go around for everybody, because there's some real radical stuff going in all the parties, in my opinion. And how do we get beyond that radical polarization of issues and concern to create real solutions that work for everybody? The truth of the matter is America is what it is. It's being referred to as a melting pot. It is a diverse society. And yes, the demographics are shifting. It is becoming blacker and browner. Some say that that's the reason. Roland Martin's book, White Fear, based on the browning of America, there's a theory that says that's part of the trigger of effect of what's happening in politics. Is the white power structure is dogmatic about taking action, and to use Malcolm X metaphor, by any means necessary. So they're being very radical, because their thing is, when they talk about making America great again, the Trump mantra, and I've seen one of the Trump's tags about taking America back. And I ask myself, from a common sense standpoint, when Donald Trump's campaign uses the slogan, "Take America back," the question in my mind is, back from who? Who is America going to take America back from? Think about that. Just think about that. So obviously, if America is one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, then who is America talking about or who is the Trump campaign talking about taking America back from? Are we one nation? Or are we within a diverse nation fighting against various facets? And if that's true, is it the color lines that divide us? If it's the political lines only, then we should be able to talk about issues. And the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are deeply rooted in American history, this nation's history. This nation does have a history, it has a past. You know, slavery, what happened in this nation, Jim Crow in this nation, lynching of black people, this nation. And so we have to really understand that and address that. And so that's the thing that a lot said, but getting this case study written, I think I've kind of framed up, just to recap it. Basing on history of my career, experiences, leadership, my organization, our mission, vision, and values, and how feeling that it's under attack, and looking at what happened in various networks that are available through technology, through the internet, the YouTube platforms, and various other platforms. There are leaders, there are alliances that are being created, there are factions, of course. Certainly, there's media polarizations. I won't get into that, but being able to, within that framework, take a position of leadership that speaks to the aspiration of what needs to happen. To be visionary means to be able to see a way forward. To be transformational suggests being strategic in a way that creates the desired results. And I take pride in those too, but also take pride in being authentic, being who I am as a black man who grew up in this community of Louisville, Kentucky, in the poorest neighborhoods, as a third generation public housing resident, proud of my heritage, had opportunities to get established in a professional career track. Most of that career track has been to go back and serve the communities that raised me, and looking at that not only as a profession but also as a calling, as an actual purpose for why I'm created, for why I'm here. And so that's what I seek to accomplish with this case study, is to put some foundational work together that allows me to frame up these issues with my literature review being focused on Jean Lao Chin's Global and Diverse Leadership, Anne-Marie Slaughter's Chessboard and the Web, and Jeremy Hyman's and Tim's New Power. And so with that, I want to distill clear recommendations. I believe those recommendations are crystal clear as I look at the research of Augustus Corbett when he talks about the assault on DEI and what we must do. He gives us a clear set of milestones. I may tweak that some, but that's kind of it. That's kind of how I see the case study. So with all that being said, in about an hour, that will conclude this recording. God bless you.